Welcome back to our five-part series on technology for business owners, where we break down the decisions, the risks, and opportunities that leaders face every day, but rarely get explained in plain language. In episode 2, we talked about execution, how to run tech projects without getting burned. Today, we're going to go deeper because the CEO's real job in technology isn't writing code, choosing tools, or even managing the developers. It's alignment. Aligning technology with revenue, aligning it with operations, aligning it with customer experience, and knowing when tech is the business versus when it simply supports the business. I'm joined once again by Chad Cook, who's spent his career building and leading technical teams across industries. Chad, good to have you back.
Thanks for having me again. Great to be here.
Well, Chad, let's start with the big one, the misunderstanding that causes most of the frustration we see in small and mid-sized companies. Owners think technology is an IT problem, but it's not. It's a business model problem. From your experience, what's the biggest gap between how CEOs think about technology and really how technology actually creates value within the organization?
Sure. Yeah, this is a good one because I think a lot of organizations think about technology as a component within the business. And the way that I think about technology is it's really an integral part of the overall business strategy. So nowadays, whether you're a tech company producing products or otherwise, everybody relies on technology. It's a critical part of our business, whether it's an application, a service, in-house, out or outsourced, or otherwise. And so while there are common components across the organization, really it's about what it is that technology brings to bear. And so from that perspective, I think about it as it's an enabler for new capabilities and new products, if as appropriate, but it really brings a lot of efficiencies to the organization with people's time, with consistency and determinism around workflows. And all of these things lead into a quality of their service, but also returns on their investment. So having this aspect of technology being sort of a tossed over the wall, which we've talked about in a couple of the other episodes, but really a compartmentalized thing instead of something that's really integrated into the business and seeing it at the same level as the other parts of the business is really important.
Yeah, I think the relevance of that, what you just said, is never been more evident than we see today with AI and technology and the integration of both. Not in a lot of cases, not necessarily displacing employees, but allowing those employees to be more fluid, to be more productive, and for the organization to see a bigger ROI from their employees by implementing technology.
Yeah, I agree. And in that area, right, a lot of what I've seen and experienced with places that I've helped is that people are functioning in very inefficient ways. And this often comes from legacy technologies that they're working in a model that is appropriate for some older way of doing things. And maybe that's legacy. It's been there for a number of years. But I always view technology as an enabler to free people up for higher value work, not so much as replacing them, right? So there's a lot of institutional knowledge and intuition in what goes into people that have been in an organization for a long time. So I want to capitalize on what it is they can bring to the organization. And if they're spending a lot of their time on manual workflows and these, sort of tedious tasks, I want to put those into technology where technology can do the job consistently and repeatably. And then they can focus and bring more value to the organization. So it's kind of a win-win in that regard. And then the other sort of follow-on effect of that is really risk reduction, right? So you have institutional knowledge that can get codified at some level, but then you have consistency in what's going on. So the quality of your engagements with customers, your product, your operations, all of those things elevate. And with that, you have a reduced risk profile across the organization.
Yeah, and we're seeing that historically, you see that across whether it's safety or it's just operational. Like if you're opening a panel with an arc flash tag. An electrician who's been in the industry for 10 years has seen those arc flash tags so many times in his daily life. His brain is almost reading what's on that tag before he even gets to that panel, because he's seen it so many times. And so if there's been a change on the arc flash tag, all of a sudden his brain still might read the last, even if he's looking at it, still might read the last one just because of the repetitive nature of that task. No different than a legal document or a sales agreement or anything. If you're dealing with standards and things that are very repetitive, that's where a lot of the errors creep in. And so that's where technology can help speed up the flow and reduce the errors, and even give reminders to, whether it's safety or whatever, to give reminders to the people working on it that, hey, there is something different here, or you need to consider this. So yeah, I think it's all positive, but can be seen as potentially, a risk to the employees, where really it's all meant to benefit them. You and I talk a lot about the three places where tech actually moves the needle, and that's revenue, operations, and customer experience, which we kind of just touched on. But let's break those down for the owner that's watching. When you look at a business, how do you evaluate whether the technology is aligned with those three areas, or whether it's just noise?
So with the revenue side, like I always think about these things in kind of two ways. There are the explicit costs, and then there are the implicit costs. And most people recognize the explicit costs, like you're paying for a service. Really, on the revenue side, it's often about whether a product or you're building a product contributes to the revenue stream. But in most cases, unless you're a product company, the technology is probably more on the implicit side of impacting that. So that's really about aligning the solutions you have in place, knowing what they all are, and seeing if they still make sense, or if you're overpaying or you're paying for too many, and really knowing what it is that the organization needs. But then on the implicit side of it also, which kind of leads into the operational piece and the customer experience of it, is the implicit side of your technology expenditures. It's not only the cost of the software or the service or the cloud hosting or the data centers, but it's also the impact on the people that are using it, operating it, and relying on it. So the implicit costs, like if you're building in-house versus outsource, which I know we'll kind of touch on, but these things all have costs associated with your staff, right? So some people are dedicating a certain amount of time to operate a technology. Some people are dedicating time in their workflows to use the technology, and how these things flow together in a way of being aware and also making sure that they're optimized for your business leads into lost time, wasted effort, and inevitably customer experience. And now the other piece of the customer experience is, this is where it's a little bit different in how I think about it than some. Customers, to me, are both external and internal, because when you have technology and people inside the business are relying on it, they're effectively customers of your own technology. So I kind of treat them the same way that I treat external customers. Really, their customers are, number one, always wanting to give them a good service, but recognize the impact of things. And I think this is often lost in organizations where they kind of view it as a sunk cost. Oh, it's just tech, and people spend, a half hour of their time wrestling with Excel, or, their data coming into it, or whatever it might be. I don't view those problems in the same manner. I want to solve those problems so that they're happy customers, because happiness leads to their efficiency, which then translates into actual customer success.
Yeah, for sure. If the ultimate customer is the client that's buying the product from you, but if you can't penetrate into the organization and make sure that the utilization is effective, that they're using all the tools that are available and receiving the results that can be delivered from the solution that you're providing, then ultimately the feedback from the field, which is going to influence the client's perception of what you're providing, is going to be skewed, right? So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's a ripple effect, right? Because it kind of like goes out. If internally you're struggling with your tools and your data and making things work, inevitably that's going to ripple out to your customers, where they're going to experience, longer turnaround times, more problems or whatnot. And their patience will, if it's a critical function, their patience will be there, but they might not be too happy about it as this goes on. So when you integrate these aspects of technology as your strategic underpinning, right, it allows you to then communicate that to the customers because they'll see it in action. You're actually solving the problems, things are working better, they're more reliable, more efficient, and the customer, it inherently gets a better experience.
Yeah, it's funny, looking back on my career in the banks. I changed banks a few times, couple times, and that was one of the biggest stress points of joining a new organization was a different way, a different program, a different steps and processes to go through to do the same work you had been doing previously, and that always seemed to be a really like it could take a new employee of a bank 6 to 9 months to really get comfortable and be operating efficiently just because they didn't really have the ability to train to the technology and to adapting to the way things were done. Eventually it made sense and you adapted, but that time that was wasted and the money that was wasted on that integration process of new employees was always seemed to be a fairly major struggle. There's another mental model that trips people up, and that is, when is technology the business and when does it simply support the business? Most owners assume they're building a tech company even when they're not. Can you walk through how you help leaders understand the difference?
Sure. Yeah. So as we were talking, right, there's the piece, if you're a product company and you're building a technology product, that's pretty obvious. You're a technology company. I think about it in the level of dependency when you're not building pure technology product, but how much are you relying on technology, right? And so larger organizations look at this as kind of business continuity. So it's already pretty aware at larger organizations that have larger teams and are more mature or regulated, especially, where this type of thought process of what am I depending on to make my business run every day, and that kind of gets rolled into BCDR, business continuity and disaster recovery plans, where at every layer you're making the determination of these things are required for my business to operate, right? So if you're a smaller organization, you might not have the team, the knowledge, or the training to recognize that your technology is actually a critical element of your business. So, a simple way of evaluating this is, if my computer was off today, can I still accomplish a good portion of my business, or am I really dependent upon these tools? And I'm, probably not stretching to say that most organizations are probably dependent on their technology now. So if we're dependent on it, and let's take that as a given, now it's how do we think about that technology relative to the business? So if we know we're dependent upon it, have we elevated it to the point of making sure that we know it's really there to sustain the business? And sustaining it isn't just making sure it works every day, but it's also continuously looking at new ways of approaching things, new technologies, and new models to operate, because it's a living, breathing thing over time, right? And that's a really, I think, important element of how you think about technology. And one of the things I want to go back to that you were talking about a little while ago on going into a new organization, right? That's an opportunity for an organization culturally to also reevaluate what they're doing. So rather than saying, hey, new person, this is how we do it, I often ask, how did you do it elsewhere? Because if there are newer, better ways that they have experience with, we want to be aware of that in this sort of living technology environment.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and that's probably a huge missed opportunity in general. Is you come in and you go, oh, that's not how we do it. Well, okay, but why do they, is it just that they were comfortable with the way they used to do it, or was there something that you can actually gain from what they experienced somewhere else, and can you integrate that into your practices and your technology? And let's maybe shift now to something kind of more practical. How do you structure your technical team? There really are three engagement models. There's the in-house, the outsourced, and hybrid, which would include fractional, but most owners choose based on cost, not based on what the business actually needs. I would even go beyond saying they base it just on cost, but on what they're most accustomed to. So how should a CEO think about these models in a way that reduces the risk and increases the alignment?
Yeah, that's a good question and topic area. All three of those models have value, right? So they can all be used well, and they're useful in certain circumstances. So I always think of in-house when you have a complex technology environment, or maybe it contributes at some level to that critical intellectual property portfolio of your organization, or it helps you maintain an edge in your market. These are good reasons to develop an in-house staff, right? Because the in-house staff develops knowledge of the business in depth, institutional knowledge over time, and also as a result of being ingrained every day into the operational aspect of the business with the teams that are around them and the teams that they're supporting and the customer interface. These are all valuable things that develop skill sets internally. And as you're aware, the cost of retention is expensive when you lose people, because as you pointed out, 6 to 9 months, you're easily spending over a year of cost typically to replace someone who's been there with any reasonable expertise or longevity. So from that perspective, in-house is helpful when you have something that requires good depth of business, or you're building technology that is going to live and breathe with you and expand, and you want that internal value, right? So the intellectual property value, or just the consistency of that. Outsourced comes in handy when you don't have technical team available to you and you need to get things done. But it's also not, it's not a free lunch either, because even if you may reduce the costs by outsourcing, you're going to spend more internal cost to manage with them, right? So then, since they're not usually there all the time, or you're reaching overseas or offshore somewhere, or engaging with them remotely, there's an extra level of effort required to both communicate your requirements, to make sure that they understand the business. So there's more involvement with the business people and the business teams to make sure that the technical folks on the outsource side understand what the business needs to do. So you might save on costs there, but it's worth factoring in on the business side. How much of your people's time is going to be spent working with them, right? Building that good partnership. And the hybrid side of it, kind of best of both worlds. Sometimes it's really useful and efficient to outsource something that you need to be done, and you can mobilize a large force to work on it and get it done more quickly than maybe a smaller team. And still recognizing some of those touch points of engagement that are going to be critical to make it work well.
I think we're seeing more and more people embracing and approaching it from the hybrid, where they've got a strong internal team that's smaller and powerful and adept with the day-to-day that they do. And instead of growing that team, they will then use some fractional or some other elements of contract employees to spool up and address bigger tasks or opportunities that come up.
Nimbleness that goes with it when you can spin up more resources rapidly, because hiring, as everybody's aware, right, takes a long time. And also having internal teams that have some technical understanding, or they're working on some portions of the technology, they'll probably be more efficient at communicating to an outsourced group and working with them more directly than someone who may not have any technical team. There's also another element of value of having some level of people in-house, right? Is people are motivated and work best when they're working together with people. So having internal teams can build that engagement model that we've hinted at it on the other talks about things, to really get a team involved where people are partnering with the business side of things and building those relationships, which really help to increase ROI and yield.
Yeah, and the next thing we're going to talk about is one of the biggest challenges we see is trust, or the lack of it. And that's where if you don't have a good internal team that communicates well, it's really hard to establish trust with an outside team, on a quickly and efficient basis. So that's again where using a little bit of both helps to bridge that trust gap. Owners don't always trust their technical teams. This is the other trust factor, right? Internally, owners don't always trust what their technical teams are saying, and the technical teams don't trust the leadership is understanding, and that gap creates delays, rework, and frustration for both sides. From your experience, what actually builds trust quickly between business leaders and technical teams?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite areas because I always think about what I do is building relationships with business around them, right? And so when we talk about technical teams, it's a foreign language to some people, so it always feels that way, that there's a separation there. My encouragement for most places, and this is how I approach things when I come in, is to really not look at your technology teams and people as separate from the business. Again, coming back to what we started out the conversation with around that compartmentalization, technology is critical to the business on the whole, so they have to be part of the organization and not viewed as, even if they're in house, as sort of like a bespoke thing that we just sort of funnel stuff to, and they provide a very concise service to make things work as best as they can. It's really important to make everybody part of that team, and so this is an engagement model that's super critical, right? So if we think of a lot of the problems that come up, and I've worked at a number of organizations that I've helped fix and evolve in different ways or modernize. And I always hear it's a technology problem. The technology team, isn't servicing me. The tech team is bad. The technology's bad. It's all bad, right? So it's always a problem area. When I think about a responsibility model, it's never really 100% one person or one thing and 0% the other, right? So for me, it's also a little bit of behavioral modification to say, well, what could I do differently? What could anybody do differently in that role to say, well, it's not 100% the tech team. Oh yeah, you're right. I could have engaged with them more to explain what I'm doing. So now it's 95, 5, but somewhere in the middle there is the relationship. And that's the key thing to building trust in your technical teams, is they have to be thought of as not the the microwave where I'm hitting a button and I'm expecting something to pop out when it's done, but part of the operation. And that really is an engagement model of what role do I play in as a technology person